Sir, don't forget the jacket. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for yet another exciting evening on this program, Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. As usual, it promises to be an exciting one. Prof, you are welcome to the program again this evening, and thank you for joining us again.
Thank you very much. And I join our moderator in welcoming our viewers and our participants to the program.
Prof, last week we ran out of time and we were talking about the margin of votes by which President-elect Joe Biden defeated President Trump. Joe Biden actually had 81 million votes, Prof. 81 million, as against the 74 we had on the other side. So it was a very wide margin. Just to bring that to your attention again, Prof.
Mhm. Thank you very much for reminding me of the need to make a correction in the figures. because it's very significant. If there is that wide margin of 7 million, it is very significant. Nobody can say that President Biden doesn't have a mandate. He does. And I believe he's simply being kind to the Republicans. But he will soon find out that the Republicans of 2021 are not the Republicans that he that he dealt with, that he interacted with when he was a senator. But he himself should have seen the signals, because the recalcitrance of the Republicans had showed up under Obama, where President Biden was the vice president. And as I once said on this program, I don't think I've seen any evidence that he was able to persuade the Republicans during the Obama period to be reasonable policymakers. They were simply recalcitrant, they were obstructionists. And in fact, you had the Senate leader at that time, Mitchell, was that the name?
Mitch McConnell.
Who was swearing that he will make Obama a one-term president. Well, even with him as leader of the Senate, he succeeded in making his own party man, Trump, a one-term president. But he showed the kind of characters that Obama was dealing with, and Biden should have seen this signal. But the difference now is that he has such a wide margin that he doesn't need to pander to the dark recesses of the minds of the Republicans.
Thank you for that, Prof. We'll come back to the United States and to Biden. But Prof, let's start off with Davos this week. That forum has been going on. What are your views on the Davos agenda this year, Prof?
Well, President Biden didn't have much of a honeymoon before he had to address major international issues. I've been struck by, if you like, the middle of the road position taken by Angela Merkel. Obviously, Merkel, this is her last time. This is her last Davos conference. Although I do expect her to fade away. She could probably be called back to address future ones. But one will suspect that this will be her last one. And you could see the way she positioned herself between the United States and China. I think while President Biden was looking at the global picture, especially what they perceive China as being up to in Southeast Asia, and was signaling that from the perspective of the United States, they almost could see formation of two blocks, an American leaning bloc and a Chinese leaning bloc, and that the United States will expect, especially the EU, to team up with the United States. Merkel pushed back on that no, given the state of the world now and the issues that the world needs to handle, there are no two blocks. That Europe wouldn't like to find itself being pressured to either team up with one bloc or the other bloc. So you've had a pushback from her and a signal to Europe that that's not the role the EU is expected to play. But then she also pushed back on the Chinese claim that there was a civilizational consensus. Those were not the exact terms that the president of China used, but that was what he connoted, and she pushed back to say no, no, no. There were differences in values, and that there should be no mistake in seeing the differences in values and the need to address those differences. Now, it looks to me as if both the Chinese president and the German chancellor were talking in coded terms about human rights, and also about the redrawing of the lines of engagement in the Southeast Asian zone between what China is claiming and what the West had always assumed where the line of engagement was drawn. So she'd try to balance the EU, not just Germany, but the EU, between these two claims, which she thought the EU should find unacceptable. What I haven't seen so far, and I would have liked to have seen, is addressing COVID-19 within a global perspective. I've been thinking quite a lot about the connection between COVID-19 and the environment in a way in which the developing countries will not be targeted as the victims, in the sense of the causes of COVID-19 emanate from the third world, especially Africa. Because if we accept that COVID-19 came from the transmission of virus from animals to human beings, the implication of that is that the causes of this transmission arises from the encroachment on animal territory, trading in rare animals, and of course, the depopulation of forests. All these three will be regarded as contributory factors. I would have liked the developing countries to push back on that, while admitting that these causes are, while accepting that they do not reject those three factors as causes, but unless there is a market for them, you are not going to get trading in these rare animals. Uh, unless there's a market for timber and logging in the developed countries, you are not going to get the deforestation. And therefore, there also must be an obligation on the developed countries to stop their becoming a market for this. Uh, that's number one. Number two, I believe that the spokespeople for the developing countries should actually make trading in these animals a criminal offense by international treaty. So the police are not just going to be chasing after poor peasant farmers in Africa who want to expand 1 acre of farm to 1.5 acres, and then you arrest them for encroaching on animal territory, while those who want to cut down maybe one log in order to feed their families, you criminalize their actions in Africa. But you could trace where these logs are going to the developed countries. You could trace which developed countries are buying these rare animals, and you don't criminalize their own participation in the trade. I think that there should be an international treaty that will make criminal the trading on both sides. I also believe that spokespeople for the developing world should make the developed countries pay for alternative farming. If you go to Israel, what you see is greenhouse farming. And unless you get an international agreement that in order to prevent future COVID-19 will help the peasant farmers to develop an alternative to encroaching on forest land, and make the world pay for that, you are not going to be addressing these issues within a global perspective. All you are going to get is, oh, well, the third world must stop doing this, the third world must stop doing that, and they will throw crumbs to the third world government to assist them in stopping their farmers. Those crumbs are not going to be sufficiently important. So in a way, that's what I would have liked to see very early on at Davos, a debate within a global perspective, but not, not the developed countries talking down to the developing countries and making us both victims and perpetrators of the causes of COVID-19. But I haven't seen that.
Uh, Prof, I think that the pattern you describe here, in terms of the developed world looking down on the developing countries, or lower economic countries, as you have referred to them in the past, has been one that has gone on and on for years. And people have said that will only change when African leaders have a mindset that will reject the crumbs that you mention. How do we get the our leaders to start to look at these issues differently, to start to say, even if you give me X billion of dollars for all these rare animals, we're not going to take this because it's not in the interest of Africa. How do we get to that point?
You'll notice that Biden Biden's approach to the environmental issue had been to appoint a former American Secretary of State to be a special representative on the environment with a seat in the cabinet. I think we should borrow a leaf from that. I would have liked to see Nigeria and South Africa jointly in a collaborative diplomatic exercise get the African Union to have a special meeting where the African Union will develop a roadmap that will actually, formulate the African interests in this environment rather than simply accepting the definition or the restructuring of the environmental issue as reached an agreement between Washington, Peking, Paris, and what have you. Then then the African Union should also appoint a special representative on the environment. Because you see, it is very easy once the developed countries or high income industrialized countries see where Africa wants to go. It's so easy for them to bring pressure to bear on individual countries. But once you could get the EU to have a collective roadmap and an AU special representative on the environment, then even individual African countries could hide behind the AU and say, we cannot deviate from the AU roadmap. But we've got to do that. And unless we do that, we will just be easy picking. If you look at the Paris Agreement on the environment, on climate change, look at it. It is really, we are both victims and perpetrators. We are the ones making the contribution. We are the one burning the wood. We are the ones setting fire to the trees. Look, and when you look at our contribution to the carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and compare it with the industrialized countries, you then know what if you recall, their strategy then is to buy credit from us so they can continue with the pollution because we are not polluting the world in such a magnitude. So they buy what we are supposed to be using, and that helps them to continue with their own pollution while we are then kept that kind of. We want to develop as well, and that's why I thought we should move away from that mindset.
Well, Prof, let me move the conversation to Europe. Since you talk about the African Union there and the impact that that could have in terms of of climate change. But let's move this conversation to Europe, where there seems to be a lot of turbulence in Europe at the minute. Um, we look at Brexit, we look at the riots in the Netherlands over lockdown issues, we look at Italian Prime Minister resigning. And you've already talked about Angela Merkel, who will be stepping down this year. What do you see in terms of the change in the power dynamics in Europe with the departure of Angela Merkel?
Um, and quite correctly, you've drawn attention to several issues. Um, and you've used the word turbulence. Um, I think that when a continent or a system, because the European Union had been a system which everybody understood for several years, the way it operated, the way it moderated the differences amongst the European countries. And all of a sudden, Brexit took place. One of the pillars, Angela Merkel, is leaving. So, in a way, what you are seeing is evidence of a system readjusting, restructuring itself to deal with these new factors. And on top of that comes COVID-19. And the original reaction of Europe in handling that, frankly, was a disaster for Europe because they all kind of fled back into their uh, 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 into themselves. Italy was battling it on its own. France was battling it on its own. Even Germany was battling it on its own until, it became evident that no, this is not the way the European Union is supposed to work. Uh, and so they found their way back to at least having a European Union arrangement where there could be collaborative efforts at handling COVID-19. Even when it came to handling the issue of vaccine at the beginning, again, the European Union didn't do any credit for itself. Britain took the lead unilaterally and approved the the initial two vaccines. The United States followed after a while with its own approval, and the European Union was still playing games. Oh, well, we are still taking a look at it. And incidentally, I think the first vaccine, there was a factory in Germany that was producing it. And they were then just kind of playing games, the kind of, to me, it was simply arrogance of diplomatic power on the part of the European Union. Not really sure they knew what they were dealing with. And then when they finally did what everybody knew they were going to do, approved the vaccine, instead of recognizing the urgency of it, oh, they still pushed forward when uh, the inoculations will start to take place. Of course, one or two of the European countries simply say, no, you're on your own on that. we are facing this major crisis, and they started injecting. And I thought that should have been a signal to Europe that this your laid back attitude will not work, not in the face of an emergency. So I think you are going to see uh, evidence of this as the European Union copes with the exit of Angela Merkel, with the exit of Great Britain, and with the differences in developments in each of their countries. They will have to find a new balance. Obviously, the new balance, and I can say this with all due respect. I've had people say when lawyers or diplomats say with all due respect, it means without any respect. But I can say this with due respect to the states aspiring to occupy the role of Germany in the EU. No, there is a correlation between the industrial power of Germany and the role that Merkel played all these years. So her exit is not going to see a diminishing role or a diminishing status for Germany. Germany is still going to be a superpower in the European Union. It is not going to be France, with all due respect to the pretensions of President Macron to be the new leader in Europe. It is still going to be Germany, even though it will take maybe some time for the new leader to find his feet and to be accepted as a natural successor to the role that Merkel used to play. And I think while we're at it, let me draw attention to the conflict between the European Union and the AstraZeneca, the producer
AstraZeneca.
AstraZeneca of the vaccine. You could see, uh, you know, I can't understand the mentality of businessmen. You took these people's money, they paid you upfront, and these were taxpayers' money. They paid you upfront for delivery of these vaccines. They risked that investment because if the vaccine had proved to be a failure, you are not going to pay their money back. But fortunately, it proved to be a success. And now you are backing off from delivery of what you agreed to by saying that you only promise to do your best. This is what the businessmen have been doing to us in Africa. And the EU had been supporting them because they are their citizens. So they've got away with a lot of uncharitable things done to us. Now they are doing it to the European Union. And I think that there should, well, I mean, I don't have a copy of the agreement, but I am hoping that those agreements were written by lawyers that allows the EU to drag AstraZeneca to court for this, but it is very unethical conduct by the company. Very unethical.
Prof, while we're on Europe, and before we leave this point, you talked about the French uh, uh, government not necessarily taking over a vacuum just because Angela Merkel has left. But in the course of this week, Prof, we have seen the French foreign minister signal that France would be prepared to use energy supply to the United Kingdom as bait for a kind of a bargaining chip for access to fishing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I knew, and I think most people also did, that Brexit was not going to be as smooth sailing as the smooth talking British Prime Minister makes it sound. It wasn't going to be. And in a way, in diplomacy, you use what you have to get what you want. If the British want access to the energy surplus produced in Europe, they are going to have to give up something for it. And the French are signaling that at the expiry of the transitional arrangement which they have now, they want access to British fishing resources. So um, I see a lot of turbulent times ahead because it's not just going to be on that issue. There are going to be other issues. You say you couldn't have been part of a system for is it 50 years or so? And then you say you could just unravel that and pull back without difficulties. Once you break eggs to make an omelette, you cannot separate the whites from the yellow part of the egg anymore. And so I expected this. And I think that the French are signaling what their bargaining chips are going to be. Uh, is it 2026 or so? When
Yes,
the present
2026.
when the present arrangement will expire.
Prof, there's a point I want to push here a little bit. You raised it in your response to a previous question, and that's this US EU alliance and Angela Merkel now choosing, in a way, not fully, as you have rightly highlighted, to side with China. Um, does this start to create um, big foreign policy headaches for the Biden administration?
Well, I wouldn't use the term headaches. He ran for office and he must know what he's going to get into. I think it provides considerable opportunities for President Biden and his team to show their dexterity at defining American interests within a changing environment. Because it's okay for Angela Merkel to push back on Biden talking about a United States EU bloc. Um, she is on her way out, and she doesn't have to face what Russia may be up to on the now is it the western flank or the eastern flank of Germany. But Russia is there. The Russian bear is there looming, and um, Putin had never hidden his his distaste for the breakup of the Soviet Empire, and uh, he's still young enough, I think, to test the mettle of Biden at standing up to um, um, a Russian escapade on the eastern flank. So it's no. Those issues are going to be there. Dealing with China, dealing with Russia. I don't think we need to worry that the EU will seek to create an independent role for itself. Uh, the EU cannot stand up to Russia by itself. It still needs the United States as an ally, uh, an important ally for that matter, militarily. American troops are still going to be there. NATO as an institution is still going to be there. And to me, nothing illustrates the solidity of the relationship between the United States and the EU as NATO. NATO is not going to unscramble, but there's a lot of job for the new team to face. And, I think diplomats like challenges. It's better than going to sleep.
Thank you for that, Prof. Let's look
Mm.
at the US now in a bit more detail. It seems like the articles of impeachment that some had hoped would have a landslide passage through the various arms of government in the US is not gaining as much steam as people had thought. Only five Republicans have supported that. What are your views on the constitutional legitimacy argument that some Republican senators have put out here, saying it's not constitutional to put Donald Trump on trial because he's now a private citizen?
Well, their lawyers, American lawyers, are going to make a lot of money arguing on both sides of the fence, um, because as far back as the as 18 something, that issue had been settled, where the secretary for war, seeing that he was going to be impeached, quickly resigned. And still, he was impeached. The Senate still tried him. Um, Although he wasn't convicted, but he was still tried. So that precedent is there. It is not very tidy. You see, we've been talking for some time now about the need for the United States to wake up and address the quagmire created by a 1776 constitution, which they are then applying in 2021. Um, and I'm sort of afraid that the United States is not addressing this quagmire with the seriousness that it deserves. Uh, something that you could do within a week, they do it in a month, and by that time the steam had gone out of the issue. Um, if these articles of impeachment had been done 3 days after the Capitol was attacked, not only will you have got a very substantial majority for it, and to transmit just one article, transmit it immediately to the Senate. The only problem I think that the Democrats faced was that the Senate was still under the control of the Republicans. But at that time, even the Senate Majority Leader, who was the Republican at that time, was still incensed enough that the speech he made that very night put the blame squarely on Trump. And maybe you just might have got the 17 Republican votes at that time. But you let the issue drag on. Until now, the steam has gone out of it. The Republicans, probably figure, well, it's a problem for the Democratic Party. It's no longer really a problem for them. Republicans are now carrying weapons into Congress, and they're attempting to bring those weapons onto the floor. I think the United States system, with all the advantages, and it has served, that system has served the United States pretty well. But I think now, given the changing nature of the world, with external terrorists and internal terrorists, I think there is probably a blue ribbon commission which needs to be set up to take a look at the changes you need to make to the American system. That is assuming that you are going to get responsible and rational Republicans to join you in the exercise. I get this impression that until something catastrophic happens, the US is not going to wake up. I really have that feeling. I don't pray for it. I don't want to be misunderstood. I don't pray for it. But I've given 2 lectures now in the past 5 years where I had pointed out that it is that my own analysis of historical events shows that it is usually a catastrophe that jolts civilization into coming up with a rational but substantive reaction to those catastrophes. The 30 years Napoleonic War in Europe finally ended up with the concert of Europe. And then you had the First World War. They needed to have a First World War before they got the League of Nations. Then they needed to have a Second World War before they got the United Nations. I could just go on and on and on. I'd done this in 2 lectures. One to an audience of diplomats, and the other one to a university audience. So I will not be surprised whether the United States won't have a major, let me just say major crisis and not use the word catastrophe before they wake up to the need to shake up their system.
Prof, let me move this question to some events of this week, still with the United States. And that's the creation by President Trump of the office of the former president. And the two questions I have for you here. First one is this, Prof. Um, Given the fact that when you look at Bush, former President Bush, you look at former President Obama, um, these former presidents, one, they're still alive. Two, it took them a while after leaving office to start to come up with formal structures for putting things in place. What do you think about former President Trump now saying he's going to set up this office to handle his affairs? And secondly, um, what really should be the role of a former president, like in the United States or, in fact, in any other country? What sort of roles should former presidents move on to?
Well, I think when you are dealing with Trump, you cannot talk about a usual arrangement because there is nothing usual about him. He does unexpected things. Um, as president, he never behaved rationally. So, as a former president, one that was disgraced, he is the only American former president to have been impeached twice. So, I expect several levels of irrationality in his action. But there is nothing, especially if you have the kind of personality and the kind of character of Trump, the moment he starts being ignored by the press, because he needs that publicity to fire his ambitions and fire his actions. The moment he discovers that the press is no longer paying that kind of attention to him that he had as president, I think a lot of steam is probably going to go out of his behavior. He needs money to run that office. The people that he will be trying to promote all around the United States need money, which he cannot provide for them. One of the things that struck me in his last 2 weeks in office was how multinational corporations and big businesses were withdrawing their financial endorsement of the Republican Party. And then, of course, he has court cases that he needs to face. And American lawyers charge an arm and a leg to appear in court. They're not going to appear free of charge for him. So it's all right for him to set up anything he wants to set up. It is the impact on the American system of whatever it is he's trying to do. Probably in the next 6 months or 9 months, he will still you'll still be hearing of him but gradually it's gonna fade away. Like an old soldier, they don't die, they just fade away. It's gonna fade away.
All right, Prof, let us go to Israel. Israel's military chief has, this week, he said that he has ordered his forces to prepare for a possible strike on Iran in the coming year. Of course, Iran is also trying to get the United States to be on their side and to return to the deal, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Israel, on the other hand, has said, look, even if you improved that 2015 deal, it is still not satisfactory, doesn't make sense operationally, doesn't make sense strategically. How should the United States respond to this?
You will recall that I think 2 weeks ago on this same program, I said, may God save us. When I say us, may God save the world from both Iran and Israel. Uh, those two countries, just one of them has the capacity to pull the world into an Armageddon. And may God save us from those two. They are playing games. First of all, it's very much unlike Israel to give her 1 year notice that it may do something military. So for the head of the Israeli army to tell his troops to be on standby to do something next year, Israel doesn't operate that way. They are trying to frighten everybody, trying to get everybody jittery. Also, they may be trying to provoke Iran into doing something silly. And I hope Iran will not bite the bait. Um, the Mediterranean, the Middle East is, even though I don't see what any American administration can do really to resolve the problems in the Middle East. Every American administration has tried, from probably President L.B. Johnson. Everyone has tried. So but it cannot be ignored. So the Biden administration pretty soon is going to get itself sucked into trying to tell both Iran and Israel to cool it, to calm down. And of course, usually what Israel wants are modern arms, which it's only America that can provide it. And people tend to forget this. The economy of Israel is actually practically economically bankrupt. Were it not for American financial assistance, which run into billions, Israel will have collapsed economically. Of course, no American administration is going to allow that to happen. So Israel is going to come up with this list of what it wants to cool it. And of course, Iran has its own agenda. And so does Biden also, in terms of going back to the original agreement. But fortunately, it wasn't a bilateral agreement between Iran and the United States. The European countries were involved, Russia was involved. And so they probably You know, it's but what Iran would then ask for, in addition to the lifting of sanctions, um, in order to, but you see, I don't see, because Iran has already gone way beyond what she had in terms of nuclear materials as of the time of signing that agreement. So, what are you going to do with that stockpile? That's the first question. Then the second is really what Trump harped upon. And I must say, Trump was right on that particular issue. Iran cannot be allowed, well, I don't think it's my business what you can be allowed to do or not allowed to do. But Iranian ambitions in the Mediterranean, in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, these are of major concerns to the United States, even if you don't bring the Israeli factor into it. How are you going to get Iran to agree to its wings being clipped in Syria, in Iraq, and in Lebanon, in exchange for what? So, as I said, I think both sides are positioning themselves uh, as bargaining tactics with the Biden administration.
Prof, we've run out of time, but there's one question on Facebook here that uh, um, I think you've answered it, but I want to put it across to you. Someone has said some have predicted the demise of the American empire. Is this the beginning of the end?
Well, it's a long way to the end. There is no doubt that uh, one has seen the narrowing of the gap between China and the United States. A narrowing of the gap. The United States is still the number one in terms of power capability, not in terms of the economy, but in terms of the power capability. One thing Biden is trying to do is to restructure and rebuild the American economy. Now, China is not going to go to sleep. I think the gap between, I think you should just regard the United States as a descending power and China as an ascending power. But the United States is not alone. You have to factor in the European Union. And I think if you factor that in, the end is a long way.
All right, Prof, thank you. We've run out of time. To our viewers across YouTube, Facebook this evening, thank you so much for the comments on both platforms. We appreciate you for your time. We'll be back again, same time next week, and we'll be addressing more international topics around the world. Prof, as usual, thank you very much, sir, for yet another enlightening evening.
Thank you. Shalom. Peace.